Okay, all right. So I am excited to talk to you guys about baby bonds today. I'm Naomi Zodi. I'm at UCLA in the School of Public Health. And okay, so for context, we have kind of two wealth inequality problems. One of them is at the right side of the screen, and it's the fact that most household wealth is held by a handful, really, of white billionaires. That's one wealth inequality problem. And the other one is what's happening at the middle of the screen, which is that for everybody else, there's substantial racial disparities in access to capital, such that half of all black households in the United States has less than $20,000 in net worth, and that includes home equity. And that's really not attenuated by individual decision-making, college education, et cetera, et cetera. It's just a legacy of generational inequalities. So that matters because wealth is really important for households, independently of income. Households can use wealth to invest in the future, take risks, weather unexpected financial shocks. So we have public policies designed to encourage and subsidize wealth building, but we haven't always been really good at it. So for example, 529s, parents can put money aside on behalf of their kids tax-free, who can then use it towards tuition later, for higher education. But you have to be financially savvy to opt into the program, and also when we use tax breaks to incentivize, obviously the highest income households benefit the most. So in the end, those parents that participate, the net worth of those households is about 25 times the net worth of households that don't participate but also have eligible kids at the median. So it just subsidizes wealth creation amongst people who already have wealth. Individual development accounts, which is where baby bonds really emerges from, is designed to encourage poor households to set income aside. But that's really hard to do when you're struggling to meet everyday needs. And so they haven't had a lot of long-term success. So baby bonds comes out of that and is designed to address those issues. The money is federally seeded and progressively distributed. So households with the least wealth get the most, up to $50,000. Parents don't put the money in, and parents can't take the money out, so the child can access it when they reach young adulthood, like another trust fund. It's universal, which kind of helps with political popularity, though progressively distributed. And also because it goes to the cohort of newborns each year, about 4 million in the United States, the total cost is actually fairly feasible. At $80 billion, it's just a little more than the cost of food stamps, which is $73 billion. And so the question is, could a program like that make headway on these big issues in wealth inequality? So I did a simulation a couple of years ago looking at baby bonds. So the idea is from Derek Hamilton, Sandy Darity. I did the empirical evaluation, like what could happen. So I got a representative sample of young adult households in the panel study of income dynamics from 2015, and we have their net worth at birth. So we could see, like, what would it look like today had we given them baby bonds when they were born. And so I used the parameters that they had. The average is 20,000, the min is 500, the max is 50,000. I kind of had to make up the other moments just briefly. So I did a kind of basically a log distribution. And the only reason that matters is because you can see with the pink, there's some households with a little bit higher net worth who would get more under a linear distribution, but it's a little more skewed with the IHS. So that was the one that I went with. Anyway, I just wanted it to be really progressively distributed. Okay, so at the baseline in 2015, we actually have fairly substantial racial wealth inequality at the median, even already like at early adulthood. So disparate access to help buying a house, paying tuition, whatever it is. So at the median, there's young white adult households have 16 times the wealth of the young black adult household. But with baby bonds, with the parameters that I described, it would reduce that to a factor of 1.4, which, so 1 is parity. And it raises net worth at the median for all young adults, including for white young adults, but more so for black young adults because of the progressive distribution on the basis of net worth. So it doesn't address the big wealth inequality problem. So most of the household wealth is still held at the tail, but it just raises the top by a little bit less. So then the question here is, with something like that, targeted at young adulthood, what would then happen at retirement? We know that in the ensuing years, over the adult life course, we tend to have widening inequalities. So if two individuals are on different trajectories, then with the passage of time, they end up further apart than they were at the beginning. But we also know that favorable macroeconomic conditions and more equitable institutions attenuate that trajectory. So it's possible that baby bonds could have some kind of observable impact there. So in order to observe an impact, we would need, for one, we need to actually observe a change in the initial position. Those need to get closer together. And then two, if not consistent returns from there, at the very least, it would need to not exacerbate the different trajectories so much so that it would undo whatever initial narrowing that it had done in the first place. So yeah, it's not likely for it to just operate through narrowing trajectories alone. We really need that first initial, getting closer in the initial position. So we have actually some iterations in place in different locales right now. So for example, here in Pennsylvania, every newborn in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania has a 529 opened on their behalf by the Department of Treasury, and they publicly seed $100, and then if you're WIC eligible, you get $150. So the projected future amount is about $500, definitely on the smaller side. In Connecticut, it passed, the governor signed it, but then it was paused before it was implemented. That one would reach $16,000 in the future. The money could be used for higher education, but also to buy a house, to start a business, or it can go directly into a retirement account. So those are the four options. In DC, they actually have implemented it, and it's a $25,000 maximum future, projected amount based on household income, and they have the same four options for use. You can buy a house, go to college, start a business, or invest it into a retirement account. So then, do we expect those to meet those two conditions? First of all, in terms of higher education, tuition, and fees, $500 is probably not going to do a lot. What's important there for Pennsylvania is that they've established this administrative mechanism where everybody's getting an account, and it's actually a little bit, targeted to household net worth or income, but it's not really going to change their lives at the amounts that they have now. So in Connecticut, it's about enough to get an associate's degree. The future projected amount is enough to buy an associate's degree today. And at the University of DC, which is a public college there, it's about enough to pay for a bachelor's degree. So in terms of buying a home in Connecticut and DC, it's about enough to put a 3.5% down payment on a median home value in those places. So the threat to, so it's within reach that we could actually observe some narrowing in that initial net worth position with these investments. But the threat to that is if tuition, is outpacing whatever these baby bonds are being invested in over time, and the same thing with home prices. Okay, so it's likely to narrow the initial position. In terms of the trajectories, it's likely that we would have inconsistent returns. First of all, whether or not a person finds themselves in a predicament where they have to consume this, is probably associated with whether or not they have access to capital from other forms, right? So if you need a life-saving kidney transplant, it would not be rational to save for retirement. You're going to sell your home, do whatever you need to do. So we might see differences in the need to consume the money. And also, maybe the marginal dollar is going to be invested in equities or higher yield asset classes amongst households that are also higher net worth at baseline. So we know that compositions of portfolios are a lot of the intergenerational correlation in net worth. So it's very likely that the marginal dollar is going to be invested in a higher yield place. So that can also contribute to inconsistent trajectories over time. And then finally, even within the same asset class, we know that there are differences in returns, for example, in appreciation rates of homes or in the return to the same degree. There are going to be differential returns to those by race. So the relative magnitudes of these issues, though, is going to be difficult to quantify without a source of exogenous variation in access to net worth. It's going to be hard to parameterize that model because we've never just given people a whole lot of money and see what they do with it. You know, if we are bringing people into home ownership, thank you, if we're bringing people into home ownership relative to, you know, renting, then it's likely that it doesn't matter that their rate of return is a little bit lower. It's a lot bigger than renting. So, you know, we don't know exactly what the relative magnitudes of these issues are going to be without that exogenous cash. We can look to the EITC, but it's a lot smaller, about $1,800 on average. And there we see that it's invested in perhaps human capital. We don't really see like changes in net worth, but we do see that amongst teens particularly, who are the closest to kind of baby bonds age, it ends up being associated with, you know, more high school graduation, college graduation, employment, and earnings. So we do, you know, there is the potential that it's being invested in human capital that then has returns. So in sum, baby bonds would improve the net worth position for young adults, very likely, and would do so disproportionately for Black and low wealth populations. It expands their capacity to invest in appreciating assets. But there also could be, thank you, disparities in returns at the extreme, which could undo the initial narrowing, but regardless would raise their level of net worth when we're not thinking about it just in relation to each other, but just looking at the well-being of Black young adults would still raise their net worth. So the policies that help us to avoid that increasing trajectory are also those that are aimed at just broadening well-being over the adult life course more generally. So things that make tuition more affordable, housing more affordable, and healthcare more affordable are the things that are going to enable them to not consume the baby bonds and more generally just to be able to save. So probably the parsimonious direct approach would be do baby bonds, improve the net worth position of these young adults in a progressive way, and couple that with programs aimed more squarely at retirement so that we can know for sure that we're doing both. Although baby bonds are probably going to help. Thanks.